Hey there, Wilty. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing my August wrap up. The first book I read in August was Everything Everything by Nicola Yoon. She's a Jamaican author. The main character is Madeline. She is an 18-year-old girl. She is allergic to everything. She has an autoimmune disease, which means that if she's exposed to things, she could get really sick and she could die because she doesn't have a developed immune system. So she lives her life indoors and she has a blog, she communicates through her computer, she emails people, but she doesn't have any friends because she can't go to school and she can't meet anyone. So things change when a new family moves next door. Ollie and his family move next door and she begins a relationship with Ollie through the window, and eventually something's gonna change. This was a really good read. I gave it a 5-star rating. It is young adult fiction, but I really enjoyed it and I am nowhere near young adult. The second book I read was an ARC that I received from NetGalley. It's entitled All the Good Parts. A woman who in her late 30s is trying to decide whether or not she wants to have a baby because her biological clock is ticking, and not just that it's ticking, but it's running out of battery. So she's trying to figure out what she wants to do with her life. She lives with her sister's husband, and their children. Her sister doesn't encourage her to have a family of her own, and you start to wonder, is her sister just really selfish because she wants her to continue living with them, or is her sister in tune with what this woman wants because she's in her late 30s, she never thought about having a family before, and here, like, all of a sudden she wants to make these big changes in her life. It was a very interesting read. I also gave that 4 stars. The next book I read was Truly Madly Guilty by Liane Moriarty. You'll know that I am like a big Liane Moriarty fan. Last year I went through a whole reading plan where I read every book that she had published, and so I was really looking forward to this brand new release, Truly Madly Guilty. With Moriarty's writing style, she takes an event that affects multiple people and she writes each person's perspective leading up to the event. Her description of events and how events relate to people, her dialogue is really well done. But there were things that I didn't like about the book. I didn't like the way it ended. I thought it ended without a resolution. There were parts of the book that dragged. It was leading up to an event, and the clues that she kept leaving me about what the event was, when the event actually happened, I felt a little let down in some ways because I felt like some of the clues that were left were not addressed. So I felt like the book wasn't completely finished, like there were things that could have been addressed. Because I've read other books by Moriarty, I know how expertly she can weave a story. When this one had like some plot holes, I felt like it was a little bit of a failure. So I gave that 3.5 stars. I'll still read everything that she publishes. So if I hear that she's publishing another book next month, you best believe I still want to read it. The next book I read was Boy Snowbird by Helen Oyeyemi. This was my first of her books that I read. I thought the book was really well written. As fantasy, it was a failure, but as literary fiction, I thought it was an excellent book. The story is about a young girl. Her name is Boy. She's growing up in New York with a father who is abusive. There's a boy named Charlie who likes her, and he tells her father that she's beautiful, and the father doesn't like hearing that because he thinks that there's too much emphasis on her physical beauty. So he tries to disfigure her so that she won't be so consumed with how she looks. And he says this thing, beautiful people don't know their worth because everything is about, their physical appearance. I ended up rating this book 4 stars. It ended a little bit strange. I felt like things weren't completely resolved, like it set up a sequel or it set up a continuation of the story, which is fine for me because I would read more from Helen Oyeyemi. Next, I read Death of a Salesman, which is a short book, so it's actually a play. Death of a Salesman is a complete 5-star rating. Next, I read Who Moved My Cheese by Spencer Johnson. It's about 4 characters, 2 little people and two mice who find themselves in a maze where they're constantly being given things every day, and one day their situation changes. And the story is about how they react to that change, whether they were prepared for the change that was going to happen, whether the change just like totally took them by surprise, how they reacted. Did they go looking for something different, or did they hang around waiting for things to change back? It's a really short read and very interesting. Complete 5-star rating. Next, I read Me and Earl and the Dying Girl. I read this last week for the readathon, and you remember that I gave this book 3 stars because this is a young adult fiction book. I thought that the language and the situations that were presented in this book were not necessarily appropriate for the age level that it was recommended for. There were things that I didn't love about the book. I thought that the language was inappropriate for the teen market that it was written for, because this is a young adult fiction. I felt like the description of Earl and the life that Earl lived was negative reinforcement of stereotypes about black people. Because Earl was the only African American character in the book, I felt like I wanted him to be more positive, to be more uplifting. There were things that Earl did that were positive because he was the one who encouraged Greg to change. He was the one who encouraged the dying girl. But his entire situation just reminded me of a black kid who lives in the projects. And most of the black people that I know do not live in the projects, their children don't smoke, their children don't curse at everyone that they see. And so I felt like that negative reinforcement of stereotypes, I thought that was very inappropriate. At the end, I gave this book 3 stars because there were positives and there were negatives, and it was okay. Next, I read Ta-Nevis Coates, Between the World and Me. This is a Pulitzer Prize finalist for 2016 nonfiction category. And it was a wonderfully profound, wonderfully deep book. Ta-Nevis Coates writes to his young son. He's like writing a letter to his son about his experiences growing up as a black man, how his schooling had not prepared him necessarily for the life that he lived as a citizen of the world, about how he became curious just from reading books. It awakened in me a desire to read just more works from prolific African-American writers. He talks a lot about Malcolm X and Marcus Garvey and James Baldwin, and he just made me want to read everything that they've written too. And I recommend this book. Toni Morrison endorsed this book. She says it is required reading, and I completely agree. So I endorse Toni Morrison's endorsement of Ta-Nevis Coates. The next book I read was November 9th by Colleen Hoover. This was my first Colleen Hoover book. She writes new adult fiction, and this book I thought fit that category extremely well. This book was my first experience with something that epitomizes the phrase all the feels. This book has every single genre and description and literary genre that you can think about. It has tragedy, it has romance, it has relationships, it has everything. It was like if you took all of Shakespeare's plays, or at least all his popular plays, and took every theme out of them and could put that in one book. This book had it. There was almost everything. It was surprising. The plot twists, the turns were really surprising. Some of them I didn't see coming. Some that I thought I could predict, they didn't happen. So I would say that Colleen Hoover is now one of my new favorite writers. Now I want to read everything by her. You know, every time I find a writer whose book I feel so strongly about, my next step is to read everything that they have written. And so I'm now on a mission to read everything that Colleen Hoover has published. So, of course, I gave this book 5 stars. The next book I read to round out my Butter Books readathon was The Problem with Forever by Jennifer L. Armentrout. This was my first time reading anything that she had published. There were parts of the book that just dragged. The main characters had grown up in foster care, and they were emotionally damaged in some respects. The main character, she had PTSD from an experience in the foster care system, and so she didn't speak. She wasn't a complete mute, but in a lot of social situations, she would just shut up. She would just not say anything. So a lot of her contribution to the book was more internal dialogue, except for when she was with people that she was extremely close to. And by close, I mean her immediate circle. I think that created a little bit of a problem for me in terms of plot development, because I wanted more from the dialogue. There was a lot of teen language that I didn't love. Every time the boy was being described, he'd be described as hot, and the Pied Piper of hotness and stuff like that. The way that I guess teenagers talk sometimes. But then there would be instances where they would use like vocabulary words, and then there was commentary on social situations, things that I don't think matched. And I don't like to typecast people and say that people are one-dimensional, but I thought that it was a little confusing because you're trying to read a person's voice, you're trying to get to know a character, you're trying to read their voice, and then you, on the other hand, you also have inconsistencies with that voice. Like the relationship between the two main characters, I couldn't get behind. It felt a little incestuous to me. I ended up rating it 2.5 stars. So I'm still interested in seeing what else Jennifer L. Armentrout has produced. I will look out for other things that she's reading. These are the 10 books that I read in August. In September, I plan to do a short book readathon from September 3rd, I think. That is my birthday week, so I'm not going to be spending all my time reading, but I think a readathon, especially a short book readathon, would be a really great way to get some of the little books that I have on my shelf just read. So I'm going to work on my September TBR, and I'll share that with you sometime soon. So let me know in the comment box if you've read any of the books that I read in August and what you thought about them. Let's have a little chat. So thanks for watching my little video. See you next time. Bye.